Rain poured down in steady sheets, drenching the busy streets as people rushed past, shielding themselves with umbrellas and coats. The city lights flickered on the wet pavement, reflecting the hurried footsteps of strangers too preoccupied with their own lives to notice two small figures huddled under a tattered cardboard sheet near a dimly lit alley. Their frail bodies shivered in the cold, their tiny hands clutched together for warmth. The twin girls, no older than 7, had known nothing but struggle. Their clothes were worn and oversized, their hair tangled, and their faces smudged with dirt. Despite their condition, their bright eyes still held a flicker of hope, a silent plea for kindness. They had spent the entire day sitting on the sidewalk, whispering to passers-by, hoping someone would spare them a few coins or a piece of bread, but the world was cruel, and most people barely glanced their way. Just as the night grew darker and their stomachs twisted with hunger, a man slowed his pace nearby. Unlike the others who had ignored them, he stopped and looked at them closely. His name was Daniel, a man in his early 40s with a warm yet weary face. He had seen suffering before, but something about these girls tugged at his heart. Maybe it was the way they clung to each other, or the way their small voices trembled as they whispered, "Please, sir, we're so hungry." Daniel knelt down, his coat dripping from the rain. "Where are your parents?" he asked gently. The twins exchanged a look before shaking their heads. "Gone," one of them murmured. A pang of sorrow tightened in Daniel's chest. He wasn't sure what they meant. Had they been abandoned? Were they orphans? The thought made him swallow hard. He couldn't just walk away. With a deep breath, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills. "Come with me," he said. "Let's get you some food." The girls hesitated. They had learned not to trust so easily, but the warmth in Daniel's eyes reassured them, and their empty stomachs urged them forward. Slowly they stood up, their tiny hands gripping his sleeves, as he led them to a small diner down the street. Inside, the warmth of the restaurant wrapped around them like a comforting embrace. The scent of fresh bread and hot soup filled the air, making their mouths water. Daniel guided them to a booth, ordering food before turning back to the girls. "What are your names?" "Lena," one said softly. "Mia," the other added. He smiled. "It's nice to meet you, Lena and Mia. I'm Daniel." As the food arrived, the girls ate hungrily, barely pausing to breathe. Daniel watched them, his heart aching at the thought of how long they must have gone without a proper meal. He didn't know their full story yet, but he had a feeling it was far more heartbreaking than they let on. After dinner, Daniel couldn't bring himself to leave them out in the cold again. He decided to take them to his apartment for the night, just to give them a safe place to sleep. The girls, though wary, followed him, their little hands clutching his once more. His home was small but warm, filled with books and the soft hum of an old radio playing in the background. He handed them fresh clothes, ones that belonged to his niece, who had outgrown them, and let them take a warm bath. For the first time in who knew how long, they felt safe. As they settled on the couch with a blanket wrapped around them, Daniel sat nearby, trying to piece together how they had ended. Up on the streets, he had no idea that within hours, he would uncover something that would leave him utterly stunned, something that would change everything he thought he knew about these two little girls. As the night deepened, the warmth of Daniel's apartment slowly eased the tension in the twin girls' small bodies. Wrapped in a soft blanket, they sat close to each other on the couch, their eyes still wary but calmer than before. Daniel watched them, his mind swirling with questions. He knew the streets could be cruel, but seeing such young children abandoned in the cold gnawed at him. Who had left them? And why? Do you remember where you lived before? He asked gently. Lena and Mia exchanged a glance before Mia spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We lived in a house. But then Mama and Papa didn't come back. Daniel felt his breath hitch. Did they go somewhere? Lena hesitated, her tiny fingers clutching the edge of the blanket. One night they left, she said, her voice tight. Mama told us to stay inside, but we got scared when they didn't come home. We waited and waited, but they never came back. A cold shiver ran down Daniel's spine. How long ago was that? We don't know, Mia murmured. We stayed as long as we could, but then we ran out of food. Daniel's jaw clenched. He didn't want to scare them with questions they couldn't answer. But something about their story felt off. Parents didn't just vanish without a trace. Had something happened to them? Were they in danger? He kept his thoughts to himself, not wanting to burden the girls any more than they already were. Instead, he said softly, "You're safe now." For the first time, Lena gave a small nod. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel didn't sleep much that night. As the twins dozed off, curled up on the couch, he sat in his chair, staring at the ceiling. His heart told him that taking them in was the right thing to do, but the logical side of him knew he couldn't just keep them without answers. They had family somewhere. Someone had to be looking for them. By morning, Daniel made a quiet decision. He would find out the truth. Over the next few days, he took care of the twins as best as he could. He bought them new clothes, made sure they ate properly, and even found an old stuffed bear at a thrift store that Mia clutched tightly at night. Their laughter slowly returned, though shadows of fear still lingered in their eyes. At the same time, Daniel began digging for answers. He asked around the neighborhood, checked missing person reports, and even called local shelters. But no one had reported two missing twin girls. It was as if Lena and Mia didn't exist. Then one evening, something happened that sent a chill down his spine. Daniel had stepped out to grab groceries, while the twins stayed home. When he returned, he found them sitting on the floor, staring at something in Mia's hands. It was a small locket, one he had never seen before. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Lena looked up, her expression unreadable. It was in Mia's pocket. Daniel frowned, kneeling beside them. The locket was old, its golden surface slightly worn. Mia hesitated before handing it to him. He carefully opened it, expecting to see a picture inside. Instead, there was a name engraved on the inner lid. It wasn't Lena's. It wasn't Mia's. It was Daniel's. His blood ran cold. He stared at the locket, his mind struggling to make sense of it. "Where did this come from?" he asked again, his voice tight. Mia shrugged. "We don't know. We've had it for a long time." Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. This wasn't a coincidence. There was no way. How could these girls, who had supposedly never met him before, have something with his name inside it? His hands trembled as he shut the locket. For the first time since finding the twins, he felt fear creep into his bones. Something wasn't right, and he was about to find out just how deep this mystery went. Daniel's heart pounded as he stared at the locket, his fingers gripping it tightly. His name was etched inside, clear, undeniable. It made no sense. He had never met Lena and Mia before. He had never seen this locket in his life. And yet, somehow, these two little girls had been carrying it all along. A million thoughts raced through his mind. Had he known their parents? Was this a message? A warning? His stomach twisted with unease. But he knew one thing for certain. He had to find the truth. Taking a deep breath, he looked at the twins. "Do you remember where you got this?" he asked again, his voice steady but urgent. Mia hesitated, then shook her head. It's always been with us. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. He needed more answers, but pressing them wouldn't help. He had to take a different approach. That night, after the twins had fallen asleep, Daniel sat at his desk and pulled out his laptop. He searched everything he could: news reports, missing persons cases, even old records. But just like before, there was nothing. No mention of Lena or Mia. No record of their parents. It was as if they had appeared out of thin air. Just as he was about to give up, an idea struck him. He carefully pried open the back of the locket, hoping for some clue. A small folded piece of paper was tucked inside. His breath caught as he pulled it out and unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky, but familiar. "Daniel, if you find this, take care of them." His blood ran cold. The note wasn't signed, but deep down, something in him recognized it. His chest tightened as old, buried memories clawed their way to the surface. Years ago, before life had hardened him, before he had distanced himself from people, he had once cared deeply for someone, a woman named Evelyn. She had been a close friend, someone he had lost touch with when life pulled them in different directions. But could it be? Could she be the twins' mother? His hands trembled as he leaned back, exhaling shakily. If Evelyn had sent this message, it meant something had happened to her, and she had trusted him, above anyone else, to protect Lena and Mia. Suddenly, everything made sense. The way the twins had looked at him with a strange familiarity, the way they had followed him so easily, as if they somehow knew he wouldn't hurt them. They weren't just lost children. They were connected to him. Daniel's throat tightened. He had spent so much of his life avoiding attachments, afraid of opening himself up to pain again. But now, fate had placed these two little girls in his hands, whether he was ready or not. Morning came with soft sunlight spilling through the windows. The twins woke up to the smell of pancakes, their sleepy eyes widening as they saw Daniel in the kitchen. He turned and smiled at them, something warm and determined settling in his chest. "Come eat," he said gently. As they sat down, he watched them, his heart feeling something he hadn't in a long time. "Purpose. I found something," he said after a moment. "Something about your mother." The girls looked up, hopeful yet nervous. "She was someone I knew a long time ago," Daniel said, his voice steady. "And she wanted me to take care of you." Lena's lip trembled. "Is she coming back?" Daniel's chest tightened. He didn't know the full truth yet, but deep down, he feared the worst. If Evelyn had been able to come back, she would have. And that meant she might never return. But he couldn't let them feel that loss just yet. Instead, he reached out, placing a comforting hand over theirs. "No matter what happens," he said softly, "you're not alone anymore. You have me." Mia sniffled, then slowly smiled. Lena squeezed his hand, and in that moment, Daniel knew he wasn't just rescuing them. They were saving him too.